to get you, Barbara.
Ever played in the cat?
Someone's in the back seat! Tell me where you are, John!
Wolfman's got Nards!
Hi guys, my name's Barry and welcome back to another full movie breakdown. Today we're going to be talking about Smile, so if you haven't seen this movie guys, just a forewarning, there's going to be lots of spoilers in here. The movie opens up to a dead body. It looks like she died of either drugs or alcohol or both. And then we see family photographs of the dead woman before it pans over to one of her daughters. Assuming it's a little girl, all grown up, we are introduced to Rose Cotter, who wakes up in her office from the dream. She's doing a checkup of her patient Carl, who always rambles. After seeing that Carl is just being Carl, another patient can be seen being brought in on a stretcher, seemingly crazed out. We're introduced to Rose's boss, Dr. Morgan Desai, who notices that Rose is working herself to the ground. After telling Rose that she can finish her shift, she's on her way out and then she hears her phone ringing, and it looks like she's not going to answer the phone, but Rose being Rose, she goes back and she just has to answer it. The call was regarding the new patient that was brought in on the stretcher. Her name is Laura. She witnessed her professor bludgeon himself to death with a hammer. Rose goes to speak to her, but she seems crazy. She's trying to tell Rose what happened to her and what she saw, but Rose can't really see past her own profession at this point. Laura tries to explain that she's a PhD candidate and she's not crazy. Laura then gives the audience our first glimpse, an idea of what it is we're going to be dealing with in the movie. She says it looks like people, but not a person. Sometimes it can be someone you know, a random stranger, a loved one who has died. All it does is smile, but not a friendly smile. Now the way she explains it, it also sounds a little bit like It Follows. The whole movie feels a little bit like It Follows as well, but it takes what's good about It Follows and it incorporates it into its own movie in its own unique way. It told Laura, "Today's the day you're going to die." Absolutely frightened, Laura screams and looks above Rose as if something's behind her, making a choking noise. Rose calls for help, but suddenly Laura is standing smiling. Now this scene will be important for the end of the movie and we will come back to this scene and we'll go into this bit a little bit more in detail. She then proceeds to slash her face and throat, showing no emotion but that smile. She drops dead, still with that horrible smile on her face. The camera pans to Rose, zooming in on her retina, letting the audience know that whatever it was has passed to her. I'm a sucker for title cards in horror movies, and one of the best recent ones, and it's almost been 10 years, is the title card for The Conjuring. When that came down, that was very frightening. This one is not as long, but it's absolutely fantastic. Rose is questioned by two detectives about what she saw. One detective, Joe, seems like he already knows who Rose is. Rose said Laura seemed to have some sort of paranoid delusions. She even explained that Laura was smiling just before she died. We get a cut of the body with the sheet over it, showing the blood soaking through in the shape of a smile. We see a nice upside down angle, one of many that we see in the movie. I like this, and I don't know if it was intentional, but anytime I saw that going upside down and turning the right way around, it feels like they're trying to tell us to turn that frown upside down. Rose goes home to Mustache, her cat, and finds some blood on her shirt from Laura, so she just jumps into a shower. She calms down with some wine in the kitchen, but as she takes a sip of her wine, the camera pans across the kitchen just to show us what she notices. It's Laura standing smiling. That's just one of the many scary moments in this film that doesn't require a jump scare, and then when we do get a jump scare in this film, we do get a build up of that jump scare so that it pays off rather than just being some cheap jump scare that we get in a lot of modern horror movies. A partner, Trevor, comes in. He gives her a fright as well. He causes her to drop her glass, but after he comes in, Laura just disappears. She tells him she had a rough day because a patient died in front of her, and that's a good excuse to show that she's on edge. Rose then goes for dinner with Trevor, her sister Holly, and Holly's husband Greg. She's zoning out while the rest of them have a conversation. They're discussing Holly and Greg's son Jackson's birthday party, wondering if Rose is going to be able to make it. And at this point in the film, we understand that Rose is a workaholic. She's always at work and she's got no other time but to be at work. So at this point, she uses that as a good excuse to say that she can't be there, even though it's a Saturday. She'll be working. Holly and Greg also try and pressure Rose into selling their mother's house, establishing that the dead body at the beginning is indeed their mother. When they get home, Rose feeds Mustache later on in that scene, and it feels like the way the camera angle goes, that it's a bit of foreshadowing for something. The next day, still a little confused, she's back at work with a nice smiley cup in her hand. She asks her colleague for some more information on the incident involving Laura and the professor that killed himself in front of Laura. She's then interrupted by Joe, the cop. It turns out they do know each other, they used to be together, and he's just making sure that she's okay. Rose continues to investigate Laura's death, and at this point Holly calls her to apologise for what happened at dinner, but when they're on the phone, Rose again sees Laura at the bottom of her building. Rose passes it off as just another hallucination and she just ignores it. She walks down the hall to find Carl sitting quiet for a change. It then turns to her repeatedly saying,
You're going to die. You're going to die.
She calls for help, and as the camera pans back to Carl as the orderlies are coming in to restrain him, it looks like he's just sitting there or lying there sleeping. Dr. Desai explains to Rose that she's tired, she's stressed, and she's possibly seen things. He forces her to take some time off, but some paid time off as well, and he's telling her that if you're tired, you're not helping the patients anyway, so just go away, take some time off and just recuperate. She drives home and notices a hobby shop, so she buys a nice little train set for her nephew Jackson because she's definitely going to be able to make it now to his birthday party now that she won't be working on Saturday. As she's wrapping the present for Jackson, she gets a text from Trevor just telling her that he'll be home later on. After the text message, her house alarm suddenly goes off. She checks the front door in a panic, but it's locked, so she kind of stops panicking, and then she turns round and the back door is open, so that's when she starts to panic again. And then her phone goes off and she hears that it's the security company asking her if everything's okay, and they seem to be asking all the right questions until they tell her,
Look behind you.
and at this point I was like, whoa, don't turn around. But as she starts to turn around, before she gets to turn right around, her phone rings again, but this time it's not in her hand, it's on the table. So she picks it up again, and it's the same security company with the same voice, again asking all the right questions. This time it's really them, so the police turn up and they do a quick sweep of the house just to make sure everything's okay. They don't find anything, but as they're leaving, Trevor's coming back to think, what's happening here? We go back to feeding Mustache again. This time he's not here. Remember the foreshadowing? As she explains to Trevor, strange things are going on in the house. She's still saying to Trevor, I can't find Mustache, can you go and look for Mustache? We cut to her mother laying on the bed again, but this time she breathes and Rose wakes up at the same time from the same dream. She goes into the living room to listen to the conversation, the recorded conversation that she had with Laura, and she notices some audio on the sound. So stupidly she has her earphones on, her back to the kitchen or wherever it is, and she puts the volume up until she hears a little noise. It sounded like a little faint gasp, maybe from Laura or maybe from something that's controlling Laura, but at this point Laura turns up and we get a jump scare. Now this is a good jump scare because we did get the build up with the audio going up and up and up, waiting for that jump scare, and then it happens. That's the sort of jump scare that I don't mind, whereas in other horror films that I've mentioned before, that you just get a jump scare and that's it, and there's no build up, so there's no payoff. Whereas in this one, yes, it's a jump scare, but there's a build up, so there's a payoff. As Rose got a fright, she grabbed a knife and she was trying to figure out what's happening, but as she's grabbed the knife, Trevor comes downstairs and sees her with the knife as well, and he starts freaking out. We then cut to Madeline, another therapist, and Rose goes to see her and have a word with her. We find out quickly that Madeline was Rose's therapist when Rose was younger, after she found her mother dead when she was just a kid. Rose is starting to look and sound like Laura did when Laura went to speak to Rose at the beginning of the movie, but you can tell that Rose is still holding back because she doesn't want Madeline to think or know that she's crazy, because at this point Rose still doesn't know if she's fully crazy or if what she's seeing is real. Trying to take her mind off what's happening, Rose goes to Jackson's birthday party. Jackson opens up Rose's birthday present, but it's not a train. It's Mustache, one of Holly's friends who kind of looks like Laura. She's smiling at Rose, but nobody else can see it. Holding her dead cat, she falls into the glass table and she's cut to pieces and she screams. She's back in the hospital. Dr. Desai comes in to see if she's okay, so just to check on her, but in the background she's not really paying attention to Dr. Desai. She's looking in the background and she sees Holly and Trevor that are having an argument. Trevor takes Rose home, but Rose is trying to explain to Trevor what's happening to her, but she's trying not to sound crazy. Trevor obviously doesn't believe her, and he's trying to tell her that she's maybe getting some of her mother's mental illness in her, and she's maybe becoming like her mother, and it's genetic, and that's what he tells her. Now she is a professional and she knows it's genetic, but she's kind of shocked and surprised that Trevor knew this, but she's also shocked that he investigated it, because She now knows that he thinks she's crazy. You can see that Rose is absolutely broken at this point. Trevor decides to sleep on the couch, leaving Rose alone in the bed. As she goes back to researching the professor that killed himself, she hears Laura calling her name from the dark bathroom. Now personally, I would have that bathroom door closed shut. She intentionally ignores it and she turns away to go to sleep, but you can see that Laura is standing there. Rose goes to Mrs. Nunez's house. She is the wife of Gabriel Nunez, who killed himself in front of Laura. Mrs. Nunez explains the events leading up to Gabriel killing himself. He was an artist, so he was drawing things that he could see in the lead up to what happened. Mrs. Nunez explained that Gabriel saw someone killing herself as well, and that caused Rose to break her cover as a false reporter. And then Mrs. Nunez is like, I thought you were a reporter. After that, Mrs. Nunez ordered Rose to leave. Even though her question was cut short, Rose did get enough information that she could continue her investigating. Rose goes to Joel's house for help. Clearly Joel still has feelings for Rose, otherwise he wouldn't help. She asked him to look up names on the police database, and he just happens to have his police laptop with him. And for every person that he searches for who have turned up dead after committing suicide, he also notices that they were involved in witnessing another suicide previously, and that's when the cogs start turning for not just Rose but for Joel as well. If it wasn't already clear, this scene also confirms what we were thinking, that after everyone who witnesses the suicide, the curse passes on to them. Rose goes home and finds Trevor sitting with Madeline. She feels betrayed by both of them. To people that are not experiencing what Rose is experiencing, Trevor and Madeline are doing the right thing. They're realistically doing the right thing. They can see that someone's not well, and it looks to us in the outside world that she's going crazy. So they're not doing the wrong thing, but Rose, because she knows she's doing the right thing, she feels like they've betrayed her. She goes to her sister's house to try and explain herself, but obviously Holly thinks that she's ending up like her mother, because Rose is trying to explain to Holly in the way that we as the audience know what's happening to Rose, but Holly just being like Trevor and Madeline, she's obviously not going to believe it. Because she doesn't believe it, Rose then blames Holly for everything that happened to her, explaining that Holly left Rose with her mother all alone, so it confirms that the dad was no longer with them. Whether he died or left, we don't know, but it was just Rose and her mother that was left in the house because Holly couldn't handle it anymore, and that made Rose resentful, not just of her mother but of her sister. Rose gets back into the car, and in the background it looks like Holly's coming out of her house and coming over to the car to speak to Rose, but unfortunately it was the curse that was playing tricks on her. As she's going crazy in the car, you can see Jackson in the background in his house looking out the window at Rose, just going nuts, and he's like, oh my god. Joel calls Rose to explain he finds 20 cases and 19 suicides, so that shows that the pattern was broken at some point, and it was broken by a guy named Robert Talley, and he killed someone instead of himself, and because he killed someone instead of himself and the fact that he survived, he's now in prison. On the way to the prison, Rose and Joel discuss the possibility of this being something supernatural, and at this point, even they, as characters in this film, they don't quite understand or believe what's happening, because supernatural things just don't exist in their world, and because it exists now and they believe it, it's shocking to them as it is to us. And as crazy as it sounds, Joel also starts to believe it due to the mounting evidence that they've got now. Joel says that none of the victims lasted more than a week, maybe even 4 days at the very least, and this gives us another movie vibe, and that is with The Ring. I did mention that it's taking elements from It Follows, which is fine, and it's also taking elements from The Ring, so it's two good movies that it's taken some of. I'm not sure they're doing it intentionally, but they're taking some of the good elements from these horror movies and putting it into their own, giving their own spin to it in a positive way. They get to the prison, but Robert Talley's not willing to say anything in front of Joel. After Joel goes, he tells Rose that you need to kill someone in front of another person. This way the trauma can be passed to the witness and skip you, and that's how Robert cheated it. She freaks out because she doesn't want to kill anyone, but because she freaks out, Robert then realises that she has the curse. She didn't tell Joel what needed to be done, obviously because he's a police officer, and she then thinks to herself that she has to kill someone, so she pretends that she never get any information from Robert. Rose gets an unexpected visit from Madeline, so she agrees to sit with her. As she's talking to Madeline, however, she gets a phone call from Madeline. Rose looks up and she sees her smiling. Obviously this wasn't Madeline. It tells her Panicked and desperate, Rose brings a knife to her work. She goes to Carl's room and waits for someone to witness her killing Carl. Dr. Desai comes in and he pleads with her. As she's stabbing Carl, Carl starts to laugh, and at this point when he's laughing, I'm like, something's not right here. And then Dr. Desai, as he's pleading with her, he starts to pull the skin off of his face. Rose wakes up back in her car. It was just a dream. Dr. Desai then actually does see her, but he notices there's a knife in the car next to her. When he's pleading with her to come into the hospital, she tells him that she needs to be alone. But when she tells him she needs to be alone, she also just instantly gets an idea, so she just drives off. Joe calls her to say that he got an APB out on her. She tells Joe that she's got a plan to beat it. It doesn't explain her plan to us, but we can assume that her plan would be to be alone, so that if she is alone, then this curse, this thing, can't pass on to somebody else. And it also means that it can't kill her either, because it's not able to pass anything on. She goes back to her old house, the house that she didn't sell, the house where her mother killed herself. The house is totally run down. It seems like nobody's been back there since her mum died. She takes a look around, just taking a trip down memory lane. She thinks back to the day that it happened, and I knew this was going to happen, but what I didn't expect was to see a different view of what actually happened. There was a time where when the mother did take her drink and drugs, she instantly regretted it, and she asked Rose for help, to call for help, but Rose didn't do it. And I think that was a very powerful scene, because Rose had the opportunity to save a life, not just a random life, but her own mother's life. And what we understand now in the movie is, because it was just Rose and her mother left in the house, it was a nightmare for Rose growing up, just living there with her mother, and possibly her mother constantly doing things like this. So the power was in Rose's hands, and she decided not to help her mother and leave her alone to die, only to discover her the next morning dead. This shows the pressure that Rose was under, not just as a child but as an adult as well, because she's now a therapist herself. Maybe she became a therapist to try and get over what happened and what she could have done to save her mother, but that weight that she had on her shoulders her whole life must have been massive. Rose starts preparing herself for when the thing comes to her. Unsurprisingly though, it shows itself as her mother. It plays mind games with Rose, asking Rose why she didn't save her when she needed help. Knowing that it's not her mother though, Rose just walks away. Rose did ask though, why did you do this to me? And it replies, because your mind was so inviting. And this gives Rose another idea. This seemed to be the theme in the film with the victims that were chosen. It seems like each victim already had a past issue in their life, so it was like the curse was meticulously choosing who was going to witness a suicide, because they would be more susceptible to the thing going inside of them. For example, Gabriel Nunez, he witnessed his brother dying in the past, so he already had past trauma. So it seems like the thing could go into him easily. And it's the same with Rose as well. She witnessed her mother dying, or she witnessed the dead body of her mother, so she's already experienced trauma as well. That's the theme that I'm getting from this film. That might be wrong, but that's just how I see it. As it comes out of the room, it appears taller and scarier, almost in its true form. It grabs her and tells her, you can't escape your own mind. As a professional, she tells it, it's my mind, you can't escape it either. That seemed to be her new plan, to trap it inside of her mind, because she thinks it's all part of her mind. She lets it burn inside the house with the rest of her bad memories. Not just free from the curse that she was involved in there, but also free from the bad memories from her past. She gets back to Joe's apartment to apologise and let him know that it's all over, but it wasn't over. Joe starts smiling and says, I'll stay with you forever. She then runs out of the apartment just to find herself back to the house that she burnt down, only this time the house wasn't burnt down, so it tells us that what happened was all still in her own mind. She didn't defeat it, she can't defeat it. The real Joe then turns up at the house, but she locks herself back into the house. She doesn't want Joe to be there, but she also doesn't want Joe to witness anything, because if he is a witness, not only will she die, but he'll be next. She screams as it reveals its true form to her, climbing inside her mouth in a really shocking scene. This takes us back to the scene with Laura, if you remember. When Laura starts screaming, she's looking above Rose as if there's something really tall that's behind her, and then she gets that choking sensation. That's what we saw at the beginning of the movie, not understanding what Laura was seeing, but because of what we saw with Rose, we now understand what Laura saw and what she was experiencing. When Joe comes in, Rose is standing with gas all over her body, ready to light herself on fire, and she turns around and she's smiling. She does it while Joe watches. The camera then pans into Joe's eye, confirming it's passing on to him, and then the movie ends. Overall, this movie exceeded my expectations massively. You do get trailers for movies that look very gimmicky, and Smile looked like a very generic, gimmicky style horror movie when it's sort of like a cheap knockoff of The Ring, It Follows, etc. That's what it felt like to me, just from the marketing of the movie. But although it did look gimmicky and cheesy, the marketing worked because the movie's now made over $200 million at the box office. For a movie that was supposed to only go to streaming, they decided let's put it out in the cinemas, and they'll be glad that they did do that because it's not only going to make its money on Paramount Plus, it's already made over $200 million at the box office, so that shows that gimmicks do work. But what makes this one better is it wasn't a gimmicky movie. What looked to be a gimmicky movie ended up being a very deep and thoughtful horror film, because you've got issues in the film like the loss of a loved one, how you deal with that, how you deal with the trauma, but they don't do it in a heavy-handed way. They do it in a way that it builds up the tension to the finale of the movie, only to understand what Rose is truly going through. So for that reason, this movie was absolutely fantastic. From the good haunting scares all the way through the movie to the good payoff and the build-up of the jump scares, everything about the scariness of the film was great. The backstory was great. The gimmick, as I would call it, was also great and not very gimmicky. And then the reveal of the curse, I want to call it the curse, I don't know what it is. The reveal of the curse at the end was also frightening. So guys, I don't have anything bad to say about this film. This was one of the most surprising horror movies of 2022 for me. But what are your thoughts? What are your ideas and thoughts about the film as well? How would you beat the curse? How would you go about things? There's so many questions, not enough answers, which is good. But leave your comments down below, guys, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye bye.